Welcome back. Happy Friday. I'm glad you're back and tuning in again. And if you're new, if you didn't tune in last week, go back and check that episode out. But yeah, I'm bringing back Afterthoughts. The idea is I'm learning stuff every week. I'd like to say every day, and sometimes that's the case, but for the most part, I'm learning stuff every week. And I'm in a life group. We just started doing a life group where we kind of talk about the ways that we fed our soul, the ways that we fed others or ministered to others, and the way that we fed our flesh. And so it's kind of an accountability prayer group thing, and it's pretty sweet. And so I figured, well, if I'm telling them what I've been learning and how I've been getting my soul fed, I might as well bring it back to the pod. And so that's what we're doing. And so I have a few thoughts every week. 10 to 15 minutes is kind of what I had envisioned, but we'll see. Last week was pretty short. And then every once in a while, I'd like to bring on some friends to share their story of coming to Christ, their story of grace, how they got saved, because I think that could be really good too. And, try to keep that within 10 to 15 minutes. And then maybe we'll do some longer form interview style stuff like I used to do. But we'll see. So yeah, if you're new, that's kind of what's going on. So like I said, I have two thoughts. I got to hurry because my boy's about to pull up. I got two thoughts. And the first one, really short, advice, how to get good advice. I was on the phone with Aaliyah earlier this week, like yesterday or 2 days ago or something. And we were talking about advice and getting good advice, which is interesting because I've been thinking about that a few days prior. And so I was talking about it with her and decided maybe that would be a good thing to share with you guys. So here's basically what I have to say about that. When I was younger, I discovered this principle just by experience. Maybe somebody told me, I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure that your boy was just smart, right? Anyway, here's the principle. The principle is the advice you get is mostly only as good as the context you give the advisor. That's kind of a mouthful. And I have a hard time being exclusive because I'm like, well, what if there's an exception? But once again, the advice you get is often only as good as the context you give the advisor. And the way I learned this was through, getting advice. I would come to my mom when I was a kid and I'd have these situations that my friends would be in, or these situations really that I would be in, and I'd need advice. I'm like, well, what do I do? They said this and it made me feel this way. Or these two people are having this kind of thing and he's asking me for advice and I don't know what's going on. And so she would give me advice. And what I found is when I give her kind of a limited scope of what's going on, such as like the way the situation makes me feel, or maybe only a few details because I didn't want to tell her the whole story. Whenever I did that, she never had a complete answer, or she didn't have like this super well-rounded advice. And so I realized, the more information I can give her, the more context, the better her advice is going to be. And one of the reasons I began to think this way was because around our house, I grew up in a Christian family. There was always, a message on or a sermon or some teaching or theology or whatever. And consistently, I would remember hearing this pattern in some sort of preaching where there would be a pastor or a counselor, and they'd be telling the story about a client or a churchgoer that had this situation. And they come to the pastor, or we'll just call him the pastor. They come to the pastor and they're like, hey, I have this situation. This is going on. What do I do? And so the pastor listens, and then he gives them, well, okay, based on what you're telling me, I think you should do this. And so the person goes and does that thing, and it doesn't work out. And so they come back to the pastor and they're like, hey, listen, that advice you gave me, it didn't work. It didn't work out the way you said it would. Or, there was just something missing. The advice wasn't complete. And so the pastor would be like, that's interesting. I think I gave you pretty good advice. They ask more questions to try to figure out what's going on. They try to get a more detailed analysis. And what would consistently happen is they'd be like, well, they left out the part where they went and did this thing, or they left out the part where so-and-so went and did this thing, or felt this way, or, a day prior you did this, or whatever. They left something out that totally changed the context of what was actually happening. And so when the person would leave out that piece of information, the advice that the pastor or the counselor was able to give wasn't as complete because they didn't have the whole story. That's essential. I could have probably just rounded that all up to say that. But, and so I'm like, that's a good point. So if I want good advice, I should give a complete picture of what's going on. And so I started, to do that as perfectly as I could, which is still very imperfect, right? Because I only have my perspective at the end of the day. But I learned that if I could be able to empathize and try to look at things through, if I'm having a conflict, if I can try to understand where they're coming from, and I can present that to, whoever I was getting advice from, my mom as a kid, then she could kind of see where they're coming from. And if she can see that, and then she can see me. And then if I just lay out the facts, not necessarily how I feel, but what actually happened, if I can lay all that out clearly, usually she would have some pretty good solid advice and a path forward that she could help guide me through. And obviously she's not perfect, so getting the context is a big part of the struggle, but then obviously the advisor can be flawed as well. But anyway, so we were talking about that, and that's just something that I've kind of hung on to. And yeah, and there's definitely negative side effects to this. I would say the people that know me well would say that I have a tendency, and maybe I'm growing a little bit in this area, but to overshare because of this. Like, I've kind of learned that I hate being misunderstood. That's another thing. And so I feel like the more context I can load people up with, the better they're going to be able to understand, not just my situation, but maybe me and my life. And so I can overshare, and that can be overwhelming. And there's definitely negative sides to that, such as that. But I would say the balance would be a good thing to figure out. So anyway, to wrap all that up and kind of tie all those ends together again, essentially what I'm getting at is the advice you get is often only as good as the context you give the advisor. And so, yeah. And so the second thing that I wanted to bring up also was to just kind of reiterate or clarify something I said last week, actually. And that was just this. Remember last week we were kind of talking about this idea of thinking about your whole life on such a large scale that it gets overwhelming. You're kind of worried about what job you're going to take, who you're going to marry, these big commitments. You're worried about that. And, there's a lot that happens in 60, 70 years. And so if you're trying to control and think about all of that, it can be very overwhelming, right? And so I said that it can be helpful to narrow your perspective down and just look at what's in front of you at a time. And I just wanted to clarify, I think it was clear, but I just wanted to clarify again what I mean by that. And that isn't that you shouldn't make plans or have goals or, have a 5-year, 10-year plan. You probably should have those things. But what I meant to say is, if we were to slow down and stop thinking of the big picture of where our life is going, and to just slow down and look at our day by day, our habits, our thought processes, like our mental health, and kind of the situations we're in relationally, financially, geographically for some people. If we're to slow down and look at all of those things, there's almost certainly something that you can improve or change now about that. Does that make sense? And so if you're being overwhelmed by big picture, maybe slow down, narrow in on, like, I don't know, this is kind of trivial and whatever, but like, for example, do you make your bed every morning? That's something I don't really make my bed every morning. It's probably not made right now. And, whether you make your bed or not maybe isn't a big deal, but maybe you'd like to be somebody who does make your bed every morning. And currently you're not that person. So something you could think about is getting up and making your bed, like making a conscious effort to do what you need to do to be the person that does that. Or, if you'd like to be somebody who's in the Word, reading your Bible every day, that's something you could put some effort into consciously doing every single day, spending time with God in His Word and in prayer. Or maybe there's some credit card debt that you've racked up and it's kind of sitting there, and you're just kind of, you've kind of pushed it off because it's like, well, I don't really have the money to pay it off now, but I will someday, some way, somehow. And there's other things to be worried about right now anyway. So I'm just going to put that in the back of my mind. Confront the debt. Do that, fix that right now. Or relationship stuff. Maybe there's an issue in your relationship, a friendship, or be it a romantic relationship, whatever it might be. Maybe there's something that's a small thing, quote unquote, that has gone unaddressed that you could bring up, now. Something that you haven't addressed, again, maybe it's a someday, some way, somehow thing that you could look at and improve now. And so, yeah, so that's kind of what I was getting at. I think that was clear. I just wanted to reiterate that because I'm still thinking about that, frankly, and trying to get myself to do that as well. And to tie all those ends together about that second thought, I would just say, if you're looking for ideas on what to look at, you're like, okay, yeah, that's a good point. I'd rather stop being overwhelmed by whole life plans, and I want to zero in on the moment and figure things out. How do I know what to look for? If you were to read, if you were to read the Proverbs, the book of wisdom, and look at the way that your life, like the wisest way to live your life, the wisest way to handle your finances, the wisest way to handle your dating relationship, your marriage relationship, whatever it might be. If you were to go through that book, or let's make it broader. If you were to go through the scriptures and look at how God has given advice to young people, or whatever age bracket you are, if you were to look at that, there's almost certainly something that you're lacking in today and right now that you can look at. And so I would encourage you to go to read the Proverbs and see, does my life match that? Am I a person of integrity? And don't just kind of scan over it and take what you want and dismiss what you don't. Like, think about it, meditate on it, and pray and ask the Lord to reveal that stuff to you. So anyway, yeah, those are some thoughts. Hopefully that was helpful. And I will see you guys next week in the next episode. Bye.